The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, we did a story about the clearly bogus Donald Trump medical letter talking about how he had done astonishingly well on every test that was done back in December. We did a detailed report on it. The story did well. We estimate a total viewership of about 350,000 views across all platforms for that story. A ton of emails came in about it. And all of a sudden, corporate media is getting interested in the story, Lewis. I turn on CNN last night and there's a panel discussion on Don Lemon's show about the trustworthiness of Donald Trump's medical letter. Looking at reporting of it today, countless websites talking about it. And now that I've had a little more time to look into this medical letter about how fantastic and tremendous Donald Trump's medical state is and how he's winning again and again with his status of health, it's even sketchier than we reported last week. So let me get you up to speed. Let's first put up the original letter, and I'll just quickly remind you of all the issues for it. Number one, the letter starts with a typo, "to whom my concern," which is just weird for such a short letter. The letter has a non-working web address where when you go to that website, there's just no website there for the doctor who supposedly did this examination. The doctor, number one, included an email address, which is weird because you don't want to get emails about something like a letter like this because HIPAA laws would prevent you from saying anything more. But it's also weird that the email address listed is a personal Gmail address. Imagine, hi, I'm the CEO of Ford Motor Company. I'd like to do business with you. Please email me at markfield0236@hotmail.com. No, it doesn't make any sense. So come on. And then in addition to that, Lenox Hill Hospital has a division of gastroenterology, but for some reason, the signature of Trump's letter refers to the gastroenterology section, which Dr. Harold Bornstein is not even a part of at Lenox Hill Hospital. And lastly, the entire language of the letter, where tests are described as only positive, when in medical language, positive means a test has confirmed a diagnosis or condition. And of course, lastly, referring to Trump as potentially the healthiest president ever, when there is no way that Harold Bornstein, MD, examined all other presidents and would have any way of comparing Trump's health to those other presidents. So every news site has basically been pointing out how ridiculous this entire thing is. Those were the problems we already reported to you last week. We now have even more insanity to report to you. A number of sites have gone back to look at Donald Trump's social media posts when this letter came out. You might remember I told you last week that Jacob Bornstein had actually been deceased for years at the time of the publication of this letter, and the letter was signed by, at least in this version, Harold Bornstein. It turns out that Donald Trump posted to both Facebook and Twitter that this was a letter signing off on his tremendously positive health and results, signed by Jacob Bornstein, a doctor who had been dead for years at the time this was released. Now, these posts have been deleted from the internet, but thanks to something called print screen, there are still records of these. And here's the Facebook post that Donald Trump put out back in December saying, "I am proud to share this report written by the highly respected Dr. Jacob Bornstein of Lenox Hill Hospital, stating that I am in excellent health. Unfortunately, Dr. Jacob Bornstein had been dead for years at the time that Donald Trump published to Facebook the assertion that this dead doctor, Lewis, had signed off on how great Trump's health is." This is completely bogus, and we actually need to see Trump's medical records. All the debunked conspiracies about Hillary Clinton's health, we have no idea what Trump's medical records actually say, and we have no idea what Trump's tax returns actually say. We have nothing about Donald Trump. That letter, at this point, can we say it is absolutely bogus and fake?
I'm comfortable saying that, yes. And I'm far more interested, though, in the tax returns than I am Donald Trump's medical records.
I agree.
because I don't have any conspiracy theories about Donald Trump's health. But if he has to fake a letter,
it's odd.
Yeah. Why do you have to fake the letter?
It doesn't really make any sense. So yeah, this story completely blowing up. We need to demand not only the tax returns, but because Trump himself has put out what seems to be a clearly fraudulent letter, we also need to figure out what the hell is going on, as Donald Trump would say, with that medical and health situation. Big news out of North Korea. BBC and CNN are reporting that North Korea has fired a ballistic missile from a submarine off of its east coast. The KN-11 missile was launched from the waters near Sinpo and flew about 500 kilometers before falling into the Sea of Japan, according to a U.S. official. Japan's prime minister said that it fell inside their air defense identification zone, and thus they are calling this a reckless act. This seems to happen often, Lewis, when South Korea and the U.S. are starting their military drills. These are totally routine, South Korea and the U.S. doing these drills together. It is also completely routine that North Korea gets very, very angry when South Korea and the United States do this. This is something we have seen before. Oftentimes, this ends with more food aid going to North Korea as well. And we've talked about that, Lewis, where a lot of time these sort of belligerent seeming escalations are actually calls for someone to offer them more food, even though they deny there's any famine problem whatsoever. All of a sudden, they scale back down when they get more food supplies.
Which is brilliant, really, because it seems to work every time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that food pretty much just goes to, some of it will go to military members. Most of it will just go to the higher-ups and the elites in Pyongyang. And the status quo will remain.
Some people laugh this off and they say, it's just North Korea. It's always the same thing. They never hit anything. It doesn't matter. Although I think that that's maybe a little too presumptuous to just laugh this off as there will never be anything here. This was the most successful test yet of these submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs. And these are particularly concerning because if you combine the mobility of the submarine and how you can prepare for launch undetected compared to a launch that would come from the surface of the Earth, this could potentially do damage. And conceptually, although they've, as we know, not done it, some of these missiles that North Korea has could reach parts of the U.S. or allied territory. So I'm not of the mindset, Lewis, that we should be completely laughing this off. I think at some point, what are sometimes written off as just intimidation tactics will not be just that. Maybe deliberately or honestly, maybe by mistake, but I don't think we should just ignore this.
No, we shouldn't ignore it. It really wouldn't take much for missiles to start being exchanged between North and South Korea. And the idea that they can launch these from anywhere, this is a very desperate leader,
right,
in a very desperate country, not something to just ignore.
No doubt about it, and we'll continue following it. Let's talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I've said many times that to have a real chance at restarting meaningful peace negotiations in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, on the side of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing administration and very, very extreme coalition needs to be out of power. They have shown that they have no credibility as real arbiters of peace or potential arbiters of peace. And at the same time, I've said that on the Palestinian side, the terrorist group Hamas, as well as Fatah, probably need to be out of power in Gaza and the West Bank if we are going to have meaningful progress in terms of peace negotiations. We have some possibly good news out of the latter. There are 5 Palestinian parties in Gaza and the West Bank that are going to be running on a joint list in the upcoming October 8th elections. These are local elections in 300 municipalities, village councils, and regional councils under the name Democratic Alliance. And the senior officials of these 5 parties are trying to position what is described as a leftist bloc as an alternative to Fatah and Hamas, which is exactly what is needed in Gaza and the West Bank. They're going to run on ideas like equality between men and women. Wow, that would be a huge positive change in the region. They are going to run on resistance to corruption. That would be a huge positive change in the region. Fatah and Hamas are a disaster in that area. This is important Number one, because these elections are expected to be the first elections in all of the Palestinian territories since Hamas took over control of the Gaza Strip in 2007. And Hamas has effectively boycotted local elections based on the Fatah-controlled Palestinian Authority. So I think that this is very, very good. Now, not everybody likes it. The Islamic Jihad movement in Palestine doesn't like it. They announced a few days ago that they're going to boycott these elections, saying this is not at all an appropriate way forward. They want Hamas and Fatah to instead work together to achieve national unity. That may be achievable. Anything good for the populations would not by Hamas and Fatah working together. And to give you a little background, PIJ, this group, is a paramilitary organization dating back to 1981, whose objective is the destruction of the state of Israel. So if you're trying to make moves that will get you closer to productive peace talks, maybe don't take the advice of the group that for the last 35 years has sought the destruction of Israel. Now, I want to restate, Louis, these are local elections. So this is not a national election. It could potentially be the first step in a similar democratic alliance being formed at the national level. I've laid out my plan many times, and a key point of that plan, no Netanyahu in Israel, no Hamas and Fatah representing the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. And maybe, and I'm really looking for the silver lining here, this could be the first baby step in the direction of Hamas and Fatah not representing Palestinians nationally in peace talks. And your mic is on, right?
That's a wonderful thing. I'm all about that. I totally support that. The problem is that Hamas, Fatah, the extremist groups that support Hamas and Fatah are just that. They're the extremist groups. And these are groups that will kill opposition in order to stay in power. So it is a first step, but they need to be very, very careful. 1
month before our presidential election here on November 8th, October 8th, these local elections scheduled to happen in Gaza and the West Bank, we will follow it and we will see what comes from this. Maybe, I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic, that this could be a first step in eliminating terrorist group Hamas as well as Fatah from representing, and that term doesn't make any sense because they really don't represent the interests of the Palestinian people, from representing the Palestinian people in potential future negotiations with Israel. Let's take a break. I'm on Twitter at dpacman, and we have a tremendous program for you today. We will finally win again with today's show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Anthony Shanks, and I want to say thank you not just to Anthony, but to all of the new members that have signed up on the brand new davidpakman.com website. I had a feeling, Louis, that restructuring the entire membership page and platform and making the bonus content more easily accessible, really giving the entire thing a facelift, I had a feeling it would improve member show relations, for lack of a better term, and it has. Even though it is only the 24th of the month, we have already surpassed the record number of monthly new members that the program has ever had, and it's only the 24th day of the month. The new website is making a difference. I stand behind it strongly.
Members are doing tremendously well.
Yeah.
and the website is winning again.
And members will continue to do tremendously well under either a Clinton or Trump administration. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. And remember that if you ever shop on amazon.com, you can support our show by first going to davidpakman.com/Amazon. Hatriot Mail today relates to something that is going on the show. Hatriot Mail, if nothing else, is often timely. And I'll remind you what Hatriot Mail is.
Between waving a Gadsden's flag from a highway overpass to drafting George Zimmerman for a 2016 run, a patriot has little time for anything else. But when that annoying little dweeb, David Pakman, really pushes the liberal envelope beyond what a God-fearing teabagger can bear, there's Hatriot Mail. Your brief respite from the unending deluge of liberal bias.
So yes, indeed, the Hatriots are very focused on the big announcement that producer Lewis would be seeking warmer and less urban areas of the world to live in, and as a result will be leaving the David Pakman Show. The Hatriots very focused on this. A twofer today for Hatriot Mail for you on this topic. Here is the first one.
David lost his cuck. Lewis got sick of being forced to wear shirts with David Pakman on it and the constant smarmy sarcasm. I'm surprised he hasn't bitch-slapped Pakman yet. I sure would. Boston's a small town. Maybe my dream will come true. David Pakman, you're a disingenuous, Soros-shilling, stupid son of a bitch.
You know, I don't have a problem with most of that, surprisingly, but Soros shilling? What evidence of that is there?
That's a common Hatriot theme, isn't it?
Yeah, they're obsessed with it, but we've never had any connection to George Soros.
No, but they think there's a funding connection. They always do. I mean, pretty much anyone saying anything even remotely positive about Hillary Clinton is funded by George Soros.
There must be some rich Jew funding us. It doesn't matter who exactly it is, but that's a common theme. And here is the second Lewis-related Hatriot Mail for today.
David, how do you feel about your boyfriend leaving? You'll be alone in your mom's garage? I thought David Pakman's show was run from a studio garage. That's what David keeps saying on the show. And that Lewis is his boyfriend. Now, maybe without Lewis' help, you will stop lying dirt on Mr. Trump.
Let me be very clear. There's enough dirt on Trump that I don't need Lewis to find it for me. Just looking at, I don't know, any website doing any investigation into this campaign gives us information on that. So people very, very focused, the Hatriotism going in the direction of the big Lewis announcement. And I will mention, we have turned Hatriot Mail into something to help the show. We have a coupon code, Hatriot40, Hatriot40, which if entered when you're signing up for membership on davidpakman.com, gives you a 40% discount off of membership for life. And for that, Lewis, we can all be grateful to the Hatriots.
Thank you, Hatriots. Wonderful. Terrific.
A really big deal was made by Trump supporters, including the queen of the birther movement, Orly Tates, a few days ago, that finally at least one poll showed that Donald Trump was ahead of Hillary Clinton. I looked into that poll. It's the LA Times USC tracking poll, which just happens to be a poll that tracks about 3,000 eligible voters daily, asking them who they support and how likely they are to vote. It is the only poll that for 2 days showed Trump ahead from like the last 3 weeks. And even that poll has already turned to saying that Hillary Clinton is ahead. Birther Queen Orly Tates has stopped emailing me since that number has changed. Here's the big picture right now. In two-way polls, and we will start by showing you these. In two-way polls, Hillary Clinton is leading Donald Trump in 25 of the last 25 polls. Now, let me do some math. 25 divided by 25. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Carry 0. That's 100% of recent polls. In 100% of the last 25 polls, as you can see here, Hillary Clinton is ahead of Donald Trump. Now, some people will hear me say this. They will say, David, you're not including Libertarian Gary Johnson or Green Party candidate Jill Stein in the polling, and you should, and I will. That is an understandable and reasonable concern. If we look at recent four-way polling, Hillary Clinton is leading 23 of the most recent 23 polls. Number 24, in terms of reverse chronological order, has her tied. Yes, Hillary Clinton's average lead is slightly lower when Jill Stein and Gary Johnson are included, 4.3%. In the four-way polls, 5.9% in the two-way polls, but it is still remaining a very one-sided race. Nate Silver's 538.com assesses the probability that one or another candidate will win. Here is how he currently has it. 85% chance that Hillary Clinton will win this election, 15% chance that Donald Trump will win this election. Look at the bottom of this image if you're looking with me. Statistically speaking, estimating Hillary Clinton's electoral vote total around 354 and Trump's in the 180s, which would be, needless to say, an embarrassing and historic defeat. popular vote estimating somewhere in the range of 48 to 41 in favor of Hillary Clinton. And lastly, electoral-vote.com updates a map based on state-by-state polling every day. That estimates 343 delegates for Hillary Clinton, 195 for Donald Trump. Very similar numbers, Lewis, between the electoralvote.com analysis and the 538.com analysis. We are starting to run out of time. This is something where if the numbers don't change soon, and I don't know if a major bombshell about Hillary Clinton would change numbers. I don't know if some kind of national security or terrorism crisis would hurt Hillary Clinton. We've said because of the particularly rash and harebrained nature of Donald Trump, and because of the more neoconservative foreign policy ideas of Hillary Clinton, the standard paradigm where terrorist attacks close to an election help the Republican may not actually hold true in this particular election. If something doesn't change soon, Hillary Clinton is going to win by a lot on November 8th.
Mm-hmm. Right now, the Republican counter to this is that these polls just aren't accurate. And so you're right. What possible, massive, groundbreaking, catastrophic thing could happen to Hillary Clinton?
Yeah.
I don't think there is one. She really doesn't need to do much more at this point. She's got it.
The Fox News sexual harassment scandal has escalated even more, and it now has pulled in Bill O'Reilly as well as former host Andrea Tantaros. I'll give you the background. It started with a lawsuit from former host Gretchen Carlson, who alleged she was sexually harassed and asked to do all sorts of things by Roger Ailes in order to continue her position on the network. She says that it was basically a boys' club, misogynist, sexual harassment, totally normalized sexual harassment situation. 20 other women then came out of the woodwork. Megyn Kelly jumped into the fray saying, yeah, this actually does happen. And it led to Fox News chief Roger Ailes resigning in shame, but with a very, very nice, reportedly $40 million golden parachute. The latest is that former Fox News host Andrea Tantaros, a right-winger, a conservative talker, not someone we can write off as some kind of safe space, Gloria Allred third-wave feminist, right? We're talking, Lewis, here about a right-winger. She has now filed a major lawsuit where she claims that Roger Ailes sexually harassed her, that other high-ranking executives created a culture of persistently abusive behavior, and this is where it starts to get even more interesting, it mentions Bill O'Reilly, asserting that Bill O'Reilly once asked Tantaros to stay with him at a, quote, very private place in Long Island and expressed a desire to see her as a wild girl. The lawsuit also mentions former Massachusetts Republican Senator Scott Brown, who Tantaros alleges made sexually inappropriate comments about her, including once grabbing her around the waist when she was buying lunch. Scott Brown responded to this where else but Twitter, saying, as a survivor of sexual abuse, I would never perpetuate language or actions as described in the Fox complaint. The actions referenced are fabricated. Listen, if sexual harassment and misogyny at Fox News surprise you, you're probably uninformed enough to be a regular Fox News viewer. There's nothing at all surprising about this, Lewis.
Or you work for Fox News. Right. But the people who work for Fox News are some of the ones making the complaints here, and these are people who have been with the company for a long time. What's the goal here? They're well paid, right? I mean,
yeah. Although there are some Fox News staffers, according to CNN's Brian Stelter, who claims to have spoken to some Fox News staffers on the condition of anonymity, they feel that the allegations made by Tantaros are sort of exaggerated. They're not totally buying it. Not really proof of anything. We have allegations. We have a resignation. We have 22 women at this point who have similar stories. Now, if you're surprised or shocked that Bill O'Reilly is mentioned, recall that he has had sexual harassment problems of his own, settling a very high-profile sexual harassment lawsuit leveled in 2004 by a producer named Andrea Macris for reportedly more than $2 million. In order to avoid having to admit any wrongdoing, he was charged with talking to his producer about his personal sexual fantasies, his masturbation, her masturbation, vibrators, sometimes reportedly appearing to be pleasuring himself during the conversations with Andrea Macris. This is all so confusing to me, Lewis, since Fox News is the only news network that's really advocating Christian morality and Christian principles. It's shocking to me that they would have these issues.
Dave, are you being sarcastic?
Yes.
You might be being a little sarcastic. Yeah.
So to summarize the full list of Andrea Tantaros's claims, I'll put this list up for you to take a look at. She says that Roger Ailes allegedly would refer to Fox News hosts as gay, so fat, and a Puerto Rican whore in one case. As I mentioned, suggests that Bill O'Reilly allegedly suggested a private meeting as his home to see her wild side. She made the Scott Brown allegations that he made sexually suggestive remarks on set and also touched her in a way she didn't like. Also claiming that Fox News ran their PR machine with an aggressive campaign to smear her once she started complaining. And Fox executive Bill Shine allegedly advised Andrea Tantaros to just let the allegations go. We will see where this leads. This does not seem to be going away, Lewis. We thought, well, maybe with the Ailes resignation, it'll go away. But we've actually seen it become an even bigger story since then.
I can't imagine there are many more people waiting in the woodwork to come out. And
you think the 22 might be the full lot of them?
It could be,
yeah.
But that's substantial. Ultimately, is this going to hurt Fox News and lower viewership?
No, I think a lot
it.
of their viewers will chalk it up to a liberal media conspiracy or something.
Yeah, or just some type of misogynistic excuse.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They've actually already, it's funny, I've noticed other corporate media outlets, they do mention this story sometimes, but they're pretty light about it. Almost like they say, we're going to play kind of nice with the other networks. And it's actually making it even harder to make the case that this is all a so-called liberal media smear, because actually corporate media has been sort of light-handed on this.
Yeah, well, if I had to guess, I'd say that this is happening in far more places than just Fox News studios.
Yeah, well, that would be another reason why other media outlets may not want to be too harsh, because they may not want the investigations turned on to them. After the break, we will speak to the great Chris Martenson. It's been a couple years since he's been on, and I really look forward to speaking with him.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program after a couple of years, I believe, Chris Martenson, who is, of course, the co-founder of peakprosperity.com. He speaks all over the world, one of the early econo-bloggers, serves on all sorts of panels, including UN panels. Chris, it's great to have you back. I was checking out some of the commentaries you've recently put out on peakprosperity.com. And you had an interesting discussion about how when we talk about crises, not all crises are equal. Some have very clear fixes, some don't. And this got me thinking about discussions about employment and labor and the economy in this presidential campaign that we have now. And I've noticed that missing from the discussions about who's going to be better for jobs or worse for jobs, who's going to reinvigorate manufacturing or the economy or whatever, missing are two sort of important ideas. One is that many of the manufacturing jobs that at one point did go overseas no longer exist, and they don't exist to be brought back to the US. And number two, and it's related, the idea that automation as a job eliminator also isn't destroyed by presidential candidates. So I want to open it up to you first generally. When you talk about not all crises being equal, what are you referring to, and how does this relate to the presidential election?
Well, David, good to be back with you and your listeners. And this important topic, and it's distinguished like this. We have to distinguish between problems and predicaments. Now, a problem has a solution. We can derive one, and usually politicians like to focus on the problem side because there's something that can be done. Even if that doesn't make a lot of sense, but there's something you can propose. A predicament doesn't have a solution. It just has an outcome that you have to manage. So Japan has a rapidly aging population. They're losing population on a net basis, and what's remaining is aging quickly, as I just said. So that's a predicament that really you have to manage that. And so there are a lot of things we're facing now that are predicaments, and our politicians aren't talking about them because they don't see a win. So they avoid them, but we don't get to avoid them because they're still with us.
So along the lines of the job automation side, my analysis has been Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump have any interest in bringing that up, because if they are the first to, the other will say, look at that. My opponent is basically just admitting we're going to lose jobs. Yeah. It's because of technology, sure. But that is a loss, and it is a point of being able to be attacked. And so is that a sense in which, in our example about job automation, there's really no political advantage to being upfront and saying, hey, everybody, there's a bigger picture predicament, to use your vocabulary, that we need to think about when we look at unemployment or stimulus or whatever else it might be?
That's absolutely correct. So let's look at a couple of examples. We know that there are 260,000 robots operating in the United States right now, and the number is growing exponentially as we're speaking. And some of these are pretty obvious. People say, oh, well, we can see how this robot is now welding seams in a car plant, so we don't need the welder, the human welder, in that car plant. I see how that job got taken away. But we're all the way down to the point now where they're having robots essentially take the orders in McDonald's and other pieces of automation, which are doing away with the human component of labor. And this is a trend. It's going on. It's going to continue to accelerate because, humans are expensive, relatively speaking. And because business in America is now all about just making money, it's always about the profits. It's about your profits. There's no more sense of greater duty that Henry Ford said, way back at the turn of the last century, where he said, if I pay my workers enough to afford my cars, I win. That seems to be missing from the dialogue. Neither party seems to be interested in actually talking about that, but the predicament remains. And if they were daring enough, they would A, mention that it happens, and then B, say, here's what we need to understand. We have to engage in this world in a new way, and we're going to have to try some new things. They would have to be bold. They would have to display real leadership. And they would have to be willing to risk a few corporate dollars in their campaign coffers to make those statements.
I want to get to the engaging with the world in a new way, because this is something we've been talking about a lot. But before we get to that, for our audience, what are some of the other bigger picture predicaments that you've identified that are going to sort of shape the picture of society and economies going forward?
Great question. This is my passion. It's my work. It's everything I focus on at Peak Prosperity. I've spent about 10 years on this. I'll spend the next 20 years if I'm alive that long, or however long I've got. This is what I want to focus on. We're facing predicaments and large-scale future trends, not just in jobs and automation, but ecologically, with respect to our energy and energy sources, and economically. And in particular, the explosive rise of debt globally all over the world. These are all gigantic predicaments that we absolutely need to face square up, because our leaders aren't facing them to head on. That's why I do what I do. I'm here to first educate people about what the context is. And then when people go, whoa, that's a big story, what do I do? It's about the solutions that we can all engage in on a personal level that makes sense given the larger context. And oh, by the way, if we all did these steps that I recommend, I think we'd be making the world a better place, and we'd be creating a world worth inheriting. There's lots we can do, but we're not doing at the national global level. So guess what? That means it's up to us to do these things.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between when you talk about debt more broadly as a global predicament? Because we've discussed quite a bit how typically Republican politicians using, quote, paying down the debt as a way to improve the economy is not really backed up by most serious economic analyses. But that's sort of at the micro, country, political solution level. Can you talk about how that's different than what you're saying with regard to global debt?
Absolutely. And this is a critical distinction. Let me draw it this way. When the crisis began in 2007, we had about I'm rounding numbers here, we had about $150 trillion in debt outstanding worldwide. Now, this is just debt. This isn't unfunded liabilities like Social Security being underfunded or pensions, just debt. And since 2007 to the end of 2014, That debt exploded by $57 trillion. We're over $200 trillion in debt worldwide. Now, here's the thing about debt that's not being talked about at the micro or even the macro level where it really needs to. What is $200 trillion in debt really saying to us? I know it's a big number. I can't even think of how big it is. But 200 trillion is saying we need the future to be bigger than the present. By bigger, we mean more cars sold, more economic output and activity, more throughput of resources. We need more from the world. We have to shove it through our economic machine just so we can pay back that 200 trillion. But the entire banking system says 200 trillion. We need that to be 220 and then 240 and then eventually 300 trillion because that's the model. It's always based on growth. So I mentioned ecology a little while ago. I'm one of those guys who says, hey, hold on. The Earth is a sphere. That means it has a finite volume. It has a fixed limit. And we're acting politically and economically as if no limits exist. But our generation, the people alive listening to this right now, are alive at a time when humans as a species are running up against hard limits. And we can see them. Fisheries collapsing, insects and other species disappearing at alarming rates. The 2016, every month being the hottest one on record. These are all signs that say, oh, yeah, there's some real actual limits here that have nothing to do with how much money or debt's in the system. Debt is a claim on real stuff. Real stuff is in fixed supply. That's the battle over the next 5, 10, 20, maybe forever number of years. And very few people are looking at this at a really large level, but it's happening. And people listening to this will already know it's happening if they open the newspaper and just read.
So we're talking about a planet that is of finite size and resources. We're talking about a significant change to labor in that previously new technologies actually expanded the number of jobs available by creating new industries. And now most of what I would consider sensible estimates say now technology is actually net eliminating jobs. What do you see as the sort of changing relationship between humans and our existence on the planet? And at the sort of political level, one of the things I keep going back to is, should we be thinking about some kind of basic income that disaggregates someone's job and daily activities from some basic ability to live on this planet? Is that something that is interesting to you? What else are you thinking about?
David, those and many other things, which we could put in a bucket called non-status quo solutions. So before I dive into a couple of those, here's where I think the battle's going to be won or lost. It's in the narratives we run. Now, humans, for about, if this is the entire human history, written word came in right at the very end. Otherwise, it was all this oral tradition. We're used to stories and narratives, and they run our lives. We're aware of this on a daily, individual basis, right? The story I have in my head makes me either experience joy or suffering. The stories drive our behaviors. So we have a cultural story that's wrong. And that cultural story is growth is good. Now, it has been for a long time, but it's no longer serving us because that growth, when it runs into limits, tends to break on the shores that it rams into without noticing they're there. So here's the positive side of this story. I visited the farms that are building topsoil at incredible rates, where if everybody did that, we would take more carbon out of the atmosphere in 10 years than has been put in through all of human existence. But we're not farming that way. We're farming a different way, which is actually, we're doing the opposite of that and putting carbon into the atmosphere. The difference between the positive story and the current story we're running is the narrative. And the narrative says, oh, making money is the most important thing, and that's why this is the best way to farm. So let's keep doing that. We have to change that narrative and says, no, we're not here to just make money. We're here to enjoy our time on the planet and leave it as good or better for the next everythings, not just humans that follow, because we're part of an overall system. So if I had to break the narrative down, we have a narrative of growth that's based on this idea of extraction, and it's very isolated. We isolate from each other and also from the natural world. And instead, we need a different narrative that's more regenerative and it's relational. And we have the technologies in place already that can do that. If better ones come along, super, but we don't need them. If we had a different narrative today, we could be putting our money and our resources towards things that actually matter. You know, that old model of we're going to squabble over resources and fight deadly wars when we don't get our way, those need to be replaced with a more global sense of this is kind of an emergency. We really have to figure out a lot of things all at once. We're going to have to shift our cultural, political, and economic institutions at a pace that's never been done in human history. It's an awesome challenge. I'm actually excited by it, but if and only if we have the right story running, and the right story has to be we're stewards, not consumers, if that's not too broad of a shift.
Real quick, just in the last few seconds we have on the basic income thing. Interesting idea given where things are going, thinking too small, not practical. What do you think?
It's an interesting idea, but incentives are everything to humans. A lot of humans, given the incentive of not having to work, won't work. And I'm a big believer that if a basic income can make sense, but it needs to be tied to something where everybody has a sense of investment in this common experiment that we're all running together. So there's ways I think it could be done well, and other ways it could be done poorly. It's a very complex question.
We'll have to have you back, because all the studies I've seen suggest that most people, even given a basic income, would still work. They might just work in something they actually like, as opposed to what they are sort of stuck in by the very nature of our society. But a conversation for a different day. Chris Martenson, co-founder of peakprosperity.com. Of course, check out his infamous crash course. Chris, it's so great to talk to you as always.
Thank you, David. Pleasure's been mine.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
To say there have been irregularities in the funding of Donald Trump's campaign would sort of be a major understatement. I told you yesterday how in order to funnel more money back into his own businesses, he tripled the rent at Trump Tower once it was his campaign donors that started paying for the rental space of that office. We have now learned that Donald Trump used his campaign funds to buy thousands and thousands of copies of his own book at retail cost, again, diverting donor money back into his pockets while artificially boosting sales figures of the book. The campaign paid Barnes & Noble $55,000 on May 10th, according to a filing with the Federal Election Commission, which is roughly 3,500 copies of the hardcover version of his book, Crippled America, How to Make America Great Again, or 5,000 copies of the renamed paperback release, Great Again, How to Fix Our Crippled America. What's his explanation? Trump's campaign is saying, okay, we were giving those away at the Republican National Convention, something that we have to do. So we bought them, and then they were being given away, and that's that. And it is true that delegates who went to the Republican convention in Cleveland last month were given canvas tote bags. They had the Trump slogan on them. They had a copy of Crippled America. They had Kleenex, Make America Great Again cups, hats, and T-shirts, and plastic fetus figurines. Now, I don't want to lose the thread about the books, but I do want to just show you, if you're watching, what the plastic fetus figurines looked like. We have a picture of that we're showing here. And what's amazing is that anti-abortion activists actually use these fetus figurines. They say, when you test positive for pregnancy, that's what you have inside you, essentially a fully formed fetus. Of course, no actual science confirms that because it's completely bogus and false. So that's an aside. Those are now that we've dealt with the plastic fetus figurines that were handed out at the RNC, we'll get back to the Trump book stuff. The RNC was asked, is it true that Trump's campaign had to do this? The RNC has not commented on that. There have been others asked for explanations on this, and the most interesting comment comes from the Campaign Legal Center, which is that in order for this to be legal, Trump would have to, at minimum, forego accepting the royalties for sales on the books. In other words, from the purchase price, some portion of that goes back to Trump as the author, the royalty. He would have to forego that. We don't know if he's done that. They've been asked. They haven't said. But big picture, of course, you are still doing this in a way that increases the number of books sold, which increases your prominence and notoriety. It is yet another way, Lewis, and we've talked about the way in which he has helped his son's vineyard by running campaign events there. This is all about enriching the Donald Trump family.
Yeah, enriching the Donald Trump brand. It's if I were Donald Trump's campaign manager, and I think I would do tremendously well.
Of course,
by the way, I would probably do better than the bumps he's had thus far.
Trust me.
I would just say that this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
This is just not something we need to do. We can give away other things. This is bad optics. Why do we need to do this at all? No one gives a crap about your book, Donald.
At the same time, one of the funniest parts about Donald Trump's self-enrichment schemes is that they're almost comparatively small time in the grand scheme of things, right? For a billionaire, supposedly, he kind of isn't thinking that big with these schemes. Yeah, you jack up your rent to pay yourself a little more at the campaign office, you buy your own books, you do some events at your kid's vineyard. It's almost like a small-time grifter carrying out, it's like a billionaire who's carrying out the ideas you would more associate with a small-time grifter. And maybe that's kind of what Trump is.
Yeah, well, maybe he is kind of one of these guys who does a million different shisty little things.
Yeah, he's got a lot going on.
And it all adds up.
He was buying hundreds of dollars of Trump bottled water for the campaign as well. So there's that little bit to add. Let's talk about Donald Trump's tax returns. There is no reason at this point not to release Donald Trump's tax returns. The backstory is Trump has said he's not going to release the tax returns because they are under audit. Now, number one, it's very unlikely that 2015 is already under audit. It typically takes a little longer for the IRS to put a tax year under audit, but he's not going to release 2015. We already know that some prior years, I think it's 08 to 2012, the audits have been cleared. He's also not going to release those. To be perfectly clear, number one, nothing prevents an American from releasing their own tax returns, whether you're under audit or not. Trump's argument is he's been advised not to until all the audits are done, but there's no legal issue whatsoever. Now, former IRS Commissioner John Moore, who was appointed originally by President Reagan and then reappointed by George H.W. Bush, and who has disclosed that he is voting for Hillary Clinton this year, he wrote a long piece saying, number one, Trump should release the tax returns. Voters should get a look at them. There could be a lot learned from them. As many have already speculated, Trump has really no excuse not to release them other than they would be damaging to his campaign. And Moore's suggestion is, okay, listen, Donald, let's grant that there might be very complicated things in some of the deeper pages of your tax returns, but release just the first 2 pages of your Form 1040, which is like the base federal tax filing, along with your Schedule A from the last 20 years, and it would give us the basics: how much Donald Trump made, how much he paid in taxes, and how much he contributes to charity. These are three of the interesting elements that some speculate could be damaging to Trump if they were to be made public. The IRS, the former IRS commissioner, is very clear that this would have no impact whatsoever on any audits that may or may not be going on. We have similar data from Hillary Clinton dating back 20 years, and there is absolutely no reason whatsoever not to release this. And it is becoming so clear now, Lewis, that this is calculated. Clearly, Donald Trump has calculated that releasing the tax returns would do more damage than keeping them private. And to be perfectly honest, if I were Trump and I saw that I was down to Hillary Clinton in 25 of the most recent 25 polls, and I saw that it was very unlikely that I was going to win this thing, why would I release them? If I'm going to lose anyway, I'd rather keep that information private at this point.
Yes, or you could take the Donald Trump on black people approach and say, what have you got to lose? If you're going to lose anyway, maybe you should just release it.
Unless you know it'll hurt you even more.
That's what we've been speculating the whole time. He knows it will hurt him.
Yeah.
So yes, I suppose at this point, you just keep it under wraps.
Show us the tax returns, Donald. Let's take a look. Let's see if you're an even bigger liar than you've already been shown to be dozens of times after dozens and dozens and dozens of times. What's one more lie? You know, the fact that you didn't donate to charity, or that you're not as rich as you say you are, or whatever. Let's take a look at those tax returns. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting voicemail I received.
Yes, David and Lewis, hello. This is Fred from Estero, Florida. And I'm calling the day of your marijuana story to say that I think there is a good reason why all of these drugs should be legalized. because it would change the heart of America from thinking that people who have problems with those drugs are criminals instead of addicts. We should be taking care of people, not punishing them.
Yeah. The thing is, you could achieve some of that by decriminalization. So that's already in the same way that we don't think of people who speed as criminals, right? Those are civil offenses. If you decriminalize drugs and make them civil offenses, you also are making it so that people who use them are not criminals. So I'm interested in the idea of focusing on drug use as a health issue. I agree with that, but you don't need full legalization to decriminalize. By its very definition, the decriminalization of all drugs would achieve that. An interesting voicemail nonetheless. On the bonus show today, we will talk about Kopi Luwak coffee. I actually have a story about this coffee, which I will tell on the bonus show. We will also meet Europe's oldest living inhabitant. And lastly, a fisherman kept the world's most valuable pearl under his bed. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. There is one way to sign up for membership and get access to the bonus show, and that's by going to davidpakman.com/membership. And if you want a discount off of membership, use coupon code Hatriot40 when you check out.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.